I hate recording in 360p. I honestly feel like, especially with the screen, I notice when I record with iMovie, like there's some difference in just how I look at the screen, how it feels like. There's just something off. I don't like something about recording in 360p. 480p, it's not HD, but I don't really watch videos in HD anyway. Now, Rini has mentioned populism, which is what I did a lot in July and early August, and that was sort of when I was just escaping depression, shit like that, which didn't last very long, by the way. And I gotta say, I just struck an epiphany and realized that populism. Well, I studied populism when I was looking through a bunch of YouTube videos during April and May on the subject, and it's a very grad school subject. When you want to learn about populism, get like a professional doctorate or master's degree on it. I mean, politics. When you study politics and political studies and things like that, you eventually have to go to the subject of populism, which is the fact that individuals run the state. This is the first principle, and the second one is that the state only sees collectives. So there has to be a social leader that responds to that collective, and I feel like that's kind of where religion comes in. Like you have these liberals or these more godlike social leaders that represent a collective, and yeah, they got to respond towards the state. Because basically, if you think about it, when you study bullshit grad school politics, you're not being given bullshit. You're being given stuff that's true. You're just not being given stuff that's true and good. Because there's no demand for that. If you want to study politics now and get involved in a political situation, political discourse, you're going to have to deal with a lot of bullshit, both received to you and what you give out to other people. So, you're given truths, but you're given bastardized truths. Now, what happens is that we critique stuff like democracy a lot and monarchy. Well, a lot of us are pro-monarchy now. Like, at Arini's highest extreme, as he said, like if he pushes his views times 11, then he would say that he's advocating monarchy, and Grog is basically for a type of monarchy influenced by corporation. And both these both have the same problem, which is basically they can both lead to a populace that's going populism is going wild. Now, what's the best way to describe populism? It's when there's a conflict between social and political. That is to say that the religious part, is having a trouble with the political government or state part. Not the same thing, but yeah, the social and political. Religion versus the state. Liberals versus their democratic society, which is basically like rain on your wedding day. That wasn't funny at all. I'm not sorry, but that wasn't funny at all. And basically, when that happens, there's that conflict, which they say is basically a good conflict because it means social will win out and stuff like that, or political will win out. All that matters is that there's a conflict that's happening between the zeitgeist and the status quo. And when that happens, it usually leads to a lot of destruction. This is where decline comes in. Decline is when this happens. I don't care what anybody else says. This is when decline actually happens. Because basically, this means that there's a conflict between both filters of society. That's on a smaller scale, on an individual scale, that's cognitive dissonance. That's mental decline. That means that there's two ideas you have of yourself and they don't agree with each other. Like, if you think I have a high value, you're a narcissist. And that you say you have a high value, but deep down inside you know you have a low value. So there's this cognitive dissonance, and that leads to a lot of mental decline, behavioral decline, and fucks you up in terms of relationships. Same thing with happens with a nation. If there's a political and social disagreement, and it comes to this point where there's both of them are pulling people to go up against each other, that's decline happening right now. And if you hate on a democracy because it leads to this, this kind of happens with a monarchy too, because they kind of overthrew the king when he raped Lucretia, which led to the end of Etruscan influence and the beginning of the Roman Republic and the end of its monarchy. Something you don't really want. French Revolution during the age of absolutism. Something you generally don't want. And French Revolution was influenced by Christianity and a lot of other things. Uh, a negative interpretation of what John Locke said. And generally, it's just a mess. So, what I have to say is that if you can, populism is there for a reason, I think. This is kind of where my theory comes in. Kind of like how a telomerase can either lead to a cancer or immortality. A populist can either lead to the collapse of a society or its inevitable savior. And it's just a way for a nation to see its best version of itself, which it can't because once it gets close there, the populace will notice that they're not getting what they want because the political sides focus on one thing and they're focused on another thing. So it generally does lead to a lot of bullshit. And I don't care if you're state monarchy, state democracy, anarcho-monarchy, or anarcho-democracy. Uh, this could happen to you. This is something you could definitely be worried about. So that's kind of my video. Generally, to conclude this, I define statism as a negative thing, where now I define it as something neutral. It's not something I support, but it's not something I'm against either. I'm like the anti-statist in the sense that I disagree with statism, but I wouldn't really say that it's something that has to go away. And how I define state now, it wouldn't be a fantasy structure, but a political reification of social zeitgeist. Same filter. So you can tell, and there's a trade-off, kind of the way that it may not be voluntary, but something is traded off in that interaction between the political and social. Kind of like if I slap you in the face, odds are it's not going to be voluntary, but there's a trade-off. If I slap you on the face, you're going to get my fingerprints and hand mark on your face, especially if it's really hard. And I'll get whatever hair, dandruff, bacteria, and yeah, basically just other dead skin cells are on your face. Maybe even some pus if you're really disgusting, like you're 13 and shit. That's kind of what happens. Yeah, that's what we study in forensics. That there are trade-offs like that. And they happen all the time whenever a contact is made. Now, how do I end this video? What should I say? Because there has to be more to be said. Whenever a populist forms, it's kind of being used in a negative way. Like, we gotta know what are its underlying principles, so we can see the good side of it, and maybe it'll become from a cancerous thing, whatever its root is, to what helps take us from a golden era to a platinum era. Basically, takes us from what would normally be the best to what's actually our best. And that's kind of what needs to be said.